Welcome to ZKast, everyone. I'm ZKast from ZK Research, and I am joined today by Bob O'Donnell from TECHnalysis Research. We're going to be talking about the Cisco AI Summit. Bob, how you been? I haven't seen you since yesterday.
Yeah, exactly. Yesterday, I'm good, Zias, man. Thanks for having me. Yeah, and I saw you had done a nice LinkedIn post, and the opening comment was powerful, and yet I agree with you, which is one of the best one-day events I've ever been to in the tech industry. I mean, they just really put on something that it looked good from the agenda, but you never, agendas versus real life aren't always, the
Yeah.
translation doesn't always happen, and they nailed it. I thought they did a great job.
Yeah, it was a very un-Cisco-like event. And what I mean by that is typically when you go to Cisco events, partner summits, WebEx One, Cisco Lives, or whatever, obviously it's a Cisco event. So the events are heavily dominated by Cisco speakers. In this case, while Jeetu Patel, the chief product officer, was the host, when I look at the list of speakers, we had Jonathan Ross from Grok, Alexander Wang from Scale AI, right? We had Ariana Huffington, Aaron Levy from Box, right? Brad Lightcap, OpenAI, even David Solomon from Goldman Sachs, the CEO of Goldman Sachs, flew out here after his earnings, just to do the Q&A with Chuck. Yeah, so
and then it was crazy, and and Cohere and just a ton of people, and yet what they also managed to do is they did get their product launch in, but they tucked it into the day. They didn't start with it. They didn't end with it. They tucked it into the middle of the discussion in what I thought was actually a pretty seamless way. And of course, that announcement was around AI defense.
Yeah. And so what do you think of AI defense?
Look, I thought AI defense looked really good. The reality is we do see all kinds of customers now starting to use these AI models. And they don't necessarily know, however, how their employees are using them, what they're using them for. And yes, a lot of these things have guardrails in place, but not necessarily an overarching set of guardrails. So what I saw AI defense as is sort of a Cisco's effort not only to continue its relevance in the AI area, which is a topic I want to discuss a little bit more, but more importantly, also to sort of extend its notion of observability, right? So when we think about Splunk and Thousand Eyes and all the technologies they have that let you have insights into how your applications are running, the types of traffic on your networks, now they're getting into the types of models that are running, the types of queries that are being run, and prompts that are being run through these models. It really sort of extends that whole notion of observability into the AI era. And to me, I thought that was the really interesting part. And it helped, in my mind, start to try and position Cisco as more of an AI thought leader, which is, I think, the whole point of what the event was.
Yeah, in fact, it's been a long time since I'd say Cisco really kind of led the charge on a particular technology, maybe back to the internet, right? So I think they're doing a good job here. And that's what I liked about the fact that they brought an ecosystem of companies together. AI is not going to be driven by one company as much as maybe NVIDIA, but for the most part, it's going to require an ecosystem to do that. And that was good to see. And I think it really nailed where customers' heads are today. I was at CES and NRF last week. In fact, at NRF last week, or actually, NRF, I guess that was this week. I did 3 CIO sessions at a total of about 50 CIOs and those across those 3 panels. And in fact, in a few of them, I tried to direct the conversation away from AI, but it kept coming back to AI. And security kept coming up as the overarching theme, right? I was on a panel with the healthcare CIO, and he was saying, look, we don't really know how our doctors are using this. And we're trying to curtail it because they're putting private information into there and things. They don't really have a lot of control over that, right? So what I think AI defense does is it helps you understand how users are using it and then be able to put guardrails in place and then protect your organization against it. And also there's a developer side of it also where you can build into applications, which I thought was important. But I thought what was really interesting about it is the continuous validation piece of it as well. So you could use current tools to protect AI workloads today, but as those models change, you might have to go then change the policies, the way the tool's set up. And so it does a continuous evaluation of it. And so you set it up once and then it goes. I thought also, Bob, an interesting aspect was the question I asked at the end of the Q&A about the implications and the tie to Hypershield. G2 actually broadened it and talked about how it works with multi-cloud defense, their SSE stack, and Hypershield. And I think one of the things that has been promised by Cisco leadership, especially since G2 took over as chief product officer, is more of a platform approach, right? And
Right.
so, when I said does 1 + 1 = 3 with Hypershield and AI Defense, he actually said that 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 = 20.
Yeah.
Right. And so I thought that was kind of an interesting aspect of it. So, and it's important for them because I think, if I look at Cisco's portfolio from a stock perspective, their biggest moving opportunity is in security, right? So being able to
Right.
nail that becomes important. So
Yeah, no, exactly. And when they had the demo of it, what was interesting was it was like a plug-in, for the cloud security overall control panel. And it looked like it's just an extension of capabilities that they offer again from a monitoring and an observability side. So I agree with you. It's like yet another piece of the puzzle. And to that Q&A, I asked Chuck at the end, I'm like, hey, how are you trying to drive the ability for Cisco to be relevant in this area? Because look, a lot of people still think of Cisco as kind of this older school, traditional company, not necessarily a relevant player in the AI era. Yes, security is important, but it's been more, sort of traditional network security types of things. Products like this, and this is not the only one to be clear, but products like this, I think, make a real statement around, hey, we have, as G2 said, permission to play. Like, yes, we have a permission to play and be relevant in this AI era and bring their customers along and bring them into that discussion. And I think that was really important. And again, it played nicely into the day because the whole day was essentially what's the state of AI in the enterprise from
yeah,
and from a product perspective, from a security perspective, from an investment perspective, from a application perspective, from a personal health and perspective. I mean, all kinds of different aspects were there, and they structured it nicely. Each of the sessions were only 20 minutes and it just moved quickly. And I commented afterwards to a bunch of the Cisco leadership that was there. I said, it's one of the few events I've ever been to where I actually wanted the sessions to be longer. So leave you wanting more is always a better thing than feeling like, okay, yeah, you guys are done. And so I
yeah.
hats off to them for organizing a very interesting plan for the day as well as a good agenda.
Yeah, I thought, and so by the way, when I looked at the attendees as well, and they put them all in this neat little book for us, I was very impressed with who was there. In fact, I think Chuck said at the beginning, they kept it intimate on purpose, but 40 of the top Fortune 100 were in attendance. And so certainly the agenda they put together spoke to the biggest of the big. And, that's who Cisco typically sells to. Now, I thought some of the themes that came out of there were pretty interesting. In fact, a lot of the speakers talked about the bar that they want to see AI get to, right? Where I think Aaron from Box said that we're going from a world of AI models to a world of AI assistants to a world where AI does the work for you. I think it was the Cohere CEO that said that for him, success with AI is it's able to complete and the autonomous agents can complete end-to-end tasks, right? And so I think there's a big expectation that we're going to be able to use AI now to complete, not just assist us with things, but truly act as a coworker. In fact, I think Jensen Huang said that earlier. Huang said that
Yes.
Last year, right? That we're shifting from co-pilots to co-workers, and just your thoughts on that. Is this the path we're headed down, where AI is actually going to be, doing a whole bunch of stuff for us?
I mean, I think it is. I think we still have a long way to go. And of course, the word agentic was flowing like water at the event because everybody's talking about that. But, couple of interesting things. So this notion that there is going to be, the agents are digital workers, like literally workers. And so there have to be policies for digital workers in the same way there are policies for human workers. And that whole notion really seemed to be kind of a theme that ran throughout the day of just how far advanced people are thinking about this. And I think that is, in fact, where we're headed. Now, enormous debate on really how far we actually are, however. And that becomes a big question mark and how far things are going to go. And the other thing that struck me is I think there is an enormous and growing gap between sort of people who understand, who are actually using some of this stuff, and most of the world who are still like, what is this stuff? Like the gap is just becoming enormous. And so it's getting hard, I think, for companies to have an intelligent strategy around how they communicate this, because explaining it, you have to explain it at so many different levels for it to really start to make sense. And you really have to extrapolate quite a bit. So I think that's going to be a big challenge for the entire industry in 25. But you got to take steps, and you got to take steps forward. And I think that's what AI defense is. And I think then that, because they also talked about, by the way, monitoring agents. And as we get into these agents in terms of the tasks they're able to do, I think there's a lot of work being done there. And we even at the end, we got into robotics. Dr. Fei-Fei Ling, who's, has been, she's a legend in AI, talking about some of the work they're doing towards robotics and leveraging these AI and some of the world model concepts that, by the way, Jensen talked about last week at his keynote. But anyway, just all of these things coming together. But yeah, clearly the expectation is you're going to have these agents that can start to do things. And then there was a lot of discussion on what's the impact on jobs, and there were a lot of different perspectives there, by the way, which doesn't surprise me because that's where the world is. People don't really know. There's some very optimistic scenarios. There were some scenarios that weren't quite so optimistic. But I do think there is this sense of you've got to have these digital entities doing things on your behalf in conjunction with you. It's the question is going to be how people get used to doing that, because this is big changes in how people work, and I think that kind of stuff takes time.
Yeah, in fact, I thought David Solomon from Goldman, his quote was interesting. I actually posted it on a LinkedIn post yesterday. Big technology waves have brought big changes in the world for a long period of time. They destroy jobs, yet we manage to create new jobs as we drive growth in the economy. And I think that statement's true. I remember the early days of the internet, people expecting it to, eviscerate a lot of jobs, and it did.
Right.
But it created a bunch of new jobs, and I think AI is going to do the same. The question I have, and that nobody can seem to answer, Bob, is what are those new jobs?
Yeah, prompt engineer. Come on, man, it's prompt engineer.
But even with that, though,
I
prompting is getting smarter, right? You're able to be less precise now, and prompt engineer actually might be a very temporary job.
No, and to be honest, I was kidding, because I agree. Because to be honest with you, the only way this actually works is if literally every single person becomes a prompt engineer, because you have to type something into these systems. And yes, they're getting smarter, but man, if there's an area that needs a lot of work, it's in that area. It's how do I get the most out of it? And yet you can see examples of people who are like, if you know what to type into a particular engine, you can get an amazing response. And if you don't really know, you don't get a great response. So you don't think it's that great. So, I mean, that's yet a whole nother topic. But, like I said, what was fascinating to me was to hear all the different perspectives on where people are going, where they see opportunities, where they see challenges, in terms of the things that still have to be done. Couple of comments that struck me was, one of them was from the gentleman from OpenAI. And by the way, hats off to G2. He was a great moderator. He did an excellent job of asking a bunch of questions, rapid fire, kind of the things I wanted to ask.
I can't believe he hosted that many sessions, asked that many questions in rapid fire fashion all day long. But
he did a great job. But anyway, one of them was on a topic that has been getting a lot of discussion, which is, hey, are we slowing down in the quality of these models? And because we're running out of data. And there was a number of people saying, yeah, we're running out of data, but we have a lot of headway still possible to improve these models. And that actually came up from a couple of different model providers. I think the Cohere person said the same thing. They thought they had caught up in a lot of ways because they were able to do so, but that there was still plenty more to move forward. So that was interesting. And then, of course, Dr. Fei Li, when she said, but we don't have the kind of data we need to do robotics yet. So,
Yeah.
there's progress in some areas, but challenges in other areas, a lot of it tied to data. And again, a lot of the themes that came out during the day were themes I think we've heard before, but again, from so many different perspectives, and to get that all together and just kind of think through, wow, we really have made a lot of progress and there are going to be some dramatic changes, but there's still a lot of work to be done. I mean, that's how I walked away from it.
Yeah, I thought I wonder about the implications to the IT pro. Arvin Jain from, I think it was him. Um, I think he was the one who referenced Jensen's comment earlier last year, where he said, actually, I think it was in the CEX keynote, that the IT department would become the HR department of the
Yeah.
future. And
Yeah.
what he meant by that was all these models have different skills, if you want to call that, in different areas. And so if you've got one that's particularly good at French language translation, you're not going to use it in Mexico, right?
Right.
But the IT department's got one that's the one that's got to figure that out, what model to use where. And I went, does the IT department want to do that?
Well, and
Right?
do they have the skill sets to do that? And
Yeah.
I think, we're going to end up having, just as there was rogue IT, I think we'll see rogue AI in a huge way, because you're right. And that was another thing that came up, was this notion of specialized models. And I think you're going to find very specialized models that certain people within an organization are going to bring in and try and leverage. Again, all the more reason for a product like an AI defense, because IT is going to have to know what's actually going on within their organization. And that is
Yeah.
going to be a huge challenge. And then, of course, again, the guardrails and how that works. And again, the development side, I mean, there was a lot of discussion about how much, code is being written by AI now, and how important and how big of a deal that is. And yet, again, how can that be guardrailed to avoid things? Because, a couple other things that came out on the agent side was like, look, if you let these things run wild, if they did hallucinate, that could be a big problem, in terms of if they're doing actual tasks. Like if they're doing it the wrong way, that could be really bad. And in fact, I just was reading some stuff today. Apparently, some of the early beta testers of the OpenAI tasks, which is their first autonomous agent thing, are finding it doesn't work at all. Like, you set a timer and it's not even working in the right time zone and stuff. So that's even worse than not having an agent. So, this stuff is I think, going to take a while to get figured out. And all of these elements play into it. And it's clear that tremendous progress is being made. But like I said, tremendous work still to be done.
Yeah, I think there's some other interesting things that came up. First of all, first of all, I do think there's an expectation that it is going to make us more productive, and I've been wondering how companies adapt to that, right? If
Yeah.
if you're working for a company and you can do your 8-hour job in 4 hours, what happens in those 4 hours? And it seems that most of the people there kind of agree that we're just going to raise people's goals, and you should, right? I think, if you're a BDR at a company or an inside salesperson, you're expected to make many more calls than you were pre-sales automation tools, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you're just punching the foot. So I think that's okay, because I think you're going to be doing less of the other stuff. I think one of the things that we didn't really get a good answer on too was pricing models.
Right.
When G2 was talking to the Box CEO, Aaron Levy, that he referenced a tweet that Aaron had that said that all the different possible ways: consumption-based, fixed price, outcome-based. And outcome-based could be something like, in a sales tool, I'm going to pay for the number of leads, right? And
Right.
in other ways, and it's something that I've been watching, Bob. In fact, I've been just looking at the contact center space, which I cover. I've asked all the vendors there. Amazon, of course, uses consumption-based because they do that for everything. But I know TalkDesk put in charge by interaction. Now, an interaction can be 500 messages or it can be 5 messages.
Yeah.
Right. I know other ones are looking at experimenting by message, and there's no real, I think, best practice here around how you charge for AI.
And,
And
and, and Yeah, and in fact, if you saw both yesterday, both Microsoft and Google already have
Yeah,
changed their pricing for their agents, right? Microsoft all of a sudden had this Copilot chat offering that essentially brought some of the things that you used to have to pay $30 a month for in for free, but then they added a per use basis to it as well. And Google did something similar. So already we're seeing this, start to change because one of the things that came up, and I haven't recently done a survey on this, I absolutely saw this kind of the writing was on the wall, is a lot of companies are having a hard time proving the ROI. They're like, we know it's making people more productive, but it's hard to really prove it. And I think a lot of companies who dove in early are seeing some of these improvements. Again, if they're trained properly and teach people how to write prompts and etc. But if they don't train them, they're not necessarily seeing it. So a lot of companies that I surveyed said, yes, we have a decent percentage of employees who have it, but to move to a bigger percentage is going to be a lot harder, and it was going to move much more slowly because they weren't necessarily convinced the value was there for everybody. Certainly is for a certain group of employees, but
yeah.
not necessarily for everybody. And that's where some of these prices challenges, I think, occur. And I think we're going to see that shift many times throughout this year and next.
Yeah, I think to me the ROI question isn't really, while it's relevant today, I don't think it'll be relevant for long. I think it's a lot like asking the ROI of the internet, where I don't
Yeah.
know, what is there one?
Yeah. No, it's
It's
fair. I mean,
it's
you're right. I mean, it's just normally, especially with new technologies, you tend to have that conversation of how do I
yeah,
justify the expense? Now, and Chuck has made this point a couple of times, Chuck Robbins, CEO of Cisco, that look, he talks to a whole bunch of CEOs and he shares those conversations, not the specifics, but the generalities of them. And a lot of them are all saying, look, we're right now, yeah, we're just spending money on it because we feel like we have to, because we're afraid competitively we're going to fall behind. And there isn't necessarily a measurement going on. They're like, we're just going to spend it. We're going to kind of see because we have this sense that it's going to be a thing in the same way, like you said, the internet uh, early on required some investment for connectivity and what have you, and improved, enhanced machines that could take advantage of that. So we're seeing some of those expenses now in a different way as companies start to deploy AI.
yeah. I think um, the what we haven't gotten to yet, Bob, are processes that are um, uniquely AI, I suppose, right?
No,
And I think that's important because that'll make the ROI less important,
right,
and you'll throw money at it because you'll get a big return on it, because you get a competitive advantage. And I think one of the things I think that we haven't thought enough about is, like, to me, the impact of the internet was to democratize access to information. The impact of AI is to democratize access to expertise,
yeah,
right? And so typically, if I'm like a sales manager and I need to run a report looking at the analytics of all my salespeople, I'd have to send that down to a team of people to do it. In fact, I think it was David Solomon from Goldman who was talking about before, where they were comparing stock portfolios. You'd have to go to the Wall Street Journal, pull out all the quotes, and it would take like 4 days to create a report to give to a customer. Now they can do it in 30 seconds, right?
right,
So you can completely change your workforce. You can up level productivity to levels where you couldn't through those other processes. Oops. And when you move to processes that are uniquely AI, that's when we're going to get the big uplift from productivity. And I think we've been doing a lot of comparing apples to apples. We're using the new technology to do things the old way better instead
right.
of rethinking how to do it the new way.
And that's a great point. And it reminds me of one of the examples I meant to bring up that combines a couple of these themes. And that was the CEO of Typeface was talking about, one of the most aggressive applications we've seen of AI is to do creative content for marketing purposes. And Typeface helps companies do that. And of course, the speculation has been that would lead to a huge loss of jobs because you could get a lot more content created by a lot less people. And he cited some examples that, I think he said $100 billion was spent simply resizing content and fitting it to different formats. He goes, those jobs are going to go away. He goes, but look, they're not high value jobs. It's a rote process. He said, but one of the interesting things they've seen is that now even the new content they're creating, they're applying it to make sure it matches the company's brand guidelines. So they've a lot of these, companies have brand guidelines in terms of the marketing and the things they want to do. And what they're doing now is applying these tools not only to create the content, but then to make sure that follows brand guidelines so they can be more consistent and have a higher, level of quality and consistency in their messaging and branding, which he said that wasn't something we expected, but it's proven to be a really important application. So it's a tiny example, but one of those things that shows how people's jobs are adjusting based on this and the new types of tasks that they're taking on because of this technology.
Yeah, and so for that reason, I think it's coming. I think it's going to come pretty fast, and I don't think most companies are ready for it. But I do expect, to your point, the comment you made earlier about shadow AI, I think that's going to become a very real thing.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure companies are really ready for that.
Yeah.
But I guess it's typically, in fact, it's good Cisco's done this so early, because typically when we as an industry, we create the security of the stuff a couple of years after we have the
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah,
And
you're
this,
trying to block the holes that have already been created.
yeah,
And you're right. In this case, I think Cisco is seeing where the holes are going to start to get formed, and they're
yeah.
trying to, prevent that from happening. So I agree. I think that's a good way to think about it.
Yeah. So bring us home, Bob. Where are we with AI today? What do you
Well, I
think
mean,
of this
look,
year?
we're in the heavy experimentation, early production phase of AI, where we've got a lot of companies who have figured out a couple of very specific things they can do, and are spending time and money to do that. Again, Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon said that, and they said they came up with hundreds of ideas, but they picked three big ones. They're like, and we're spending our time and money on those three big ones that we think can really deliver value. And I think a lot of companies are starting to do that. The challenge that I think AI Defense helps with is it'll help those models. And again, G2 said, hey, instead of having to test this model for 7 weeks, we can do it in 30 seconds, and then we can continuously automate it. A lot of companies are doing experiments, and so you need an AI defense tool that so that while those experiments are going on, data isn't being leaked and guardrails aren't being broken, and the quality of the data being generated is still good. So I think we're in that phase of a sense of this is a real thing. We're going to make it happen. We're going to start these deployments. We're still got a long path to figure out exactly how to do it, but we can start to make it work if we make a serious commitment to it. And I think that's kind of where we are with AI.
Yeah, I think to me, one of the big barriers is just people's being afraid of the change in the status quo.
Yes.
And you talk to some AI has been proven to write code faster than people, but you talk to a lot of coders, they don't want to use it, right? And
Yeah, of course not. I mean,
yeah,
this is a classic case of this is more of a people problem than it is a technology problem. And when you get, you're forcing people to change their habits and the way they think and the way they work in a radically different way, you got to be really careful. And this is where training and education and awareness of the impact of this technology has to play a role in how you deploy it, because there's the potential to really dramatically change some people's work lives. And sometimes that's not the easiest thing for people to accept. And they'll come up with excuses as to why it won't work, rather than try and make those changes. And that's a challenge, I think, that we're going to see with AI for several years to come.
yeah. I remember when I was an IT pro, actually, I started virtualizing applications. I had workers that would sit there with a stopwatch and go, it was 2 seconds faster, the old way or something like that. And I wasn't even changing the app. I was just moving it from one platform to another, right? And but change is hard. I do think the ability to democratize expertise is fascinating, though, because I think
Yes.
I've been doing a little work with this sports startup called Consumer Sports. Larissa worked formerly at Cisco, actually, as the CEO there, but they're able to, through video analytics, be able to take a look at the way a player throws a football or runs, and be able to project how they might do as a pro. If you're some kid in Dallas, Texas, with a bunch of coaches around you, you probably have people that can look at that and tell you what's wrong, right? If you're some kid growing up in rural Idaho, you don't have the same access to
Yeah.
information, but now through AI, you do, right?
Yeah.
And so it creates a great leveling effect. and I think has the opportunity to grow our GDP, and much like the internet did. So I'm pretty excited about it. I just think that we could go through a pretty bumpy couple of years as we get used to what these things can do. I will say though that there have been use cases. I remember talking to Mass General about this when they started using AI to look at MRIs. The data scientists there that I talked to said the doctors were first fundamentally opposed to it. There's no way they wanted machines looking at their patient information. But then what they realized was it could spot the most minuscule brain bleed or something. And the doctor, instead of spending 90% of the time diagnosing MRIs and only 10% of the time treating patients, that flipped around, right? And so from a doctor perspective, they were so much more productive and treat so many more patients because the AI could connect the dots to things they couldn't see. So I think once you try these things, you realize it is better.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And I think that's, it's going to be the willingness to do that. And again, training people and educating them on what it can and can't do is going to be absolutely critical. And, and for the record, to bring it back home, I mean, it's good to see Cisco as part of this equation. And one last thing is, I think they said they're going to make all of this information, all the talks available. So if you're interested, I don't know where they're going to put it, but maybe by the time you publish this, they'll have a link to it. But
yeah, I think it's not for another 10 days. So the other thing they said was they're going to make this an annual event. And I was talking to Maria Poveromo about this, who runs communications there, that it's an interesting goal. And I said, in some ways, if you're doing this event in 5 years, then the purpose of the event kind of failed. And I said it was a lot like Cisco used to do this thing called IoT World Forum. And I remember telling Chambers that very same thing. And so they did it 4 years in a row, but then IoT became such a common thing, you didn't really have to evangelize IoT anymore. And I think, with AI, I mean, they could make it an emerging technology event and whatever the next thing to bring it in, right? But I think as an AI summit, will we have it next year? Absolutely. Will we have it in 27? Probably. 28 though, we should have quite a bit of AI in our lives. So
no, that's a good way to think about it.
Yeah. So but then on to the next thing, and so that's pretty exciting for us. So anything else you want to add, Bob? Any other key takeaways?
No, it was like I said, it was a really interesting day, nicely done. So hats off to the Cisco folks, and appreciated the chat. I mean, it was
like I said, the list of speakers was just unbelievable. It's so impressive, and then the quality of attendees, I think, reflected the quality of the speakers. So it's hard to go, to get the executives from 40 of the Fortune 100 to come out for a one-day event, unless you got some value. And so I think that alone is a testament to the value.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. All right, Bob. Well, I guess I'll be seeing you somewhere sometime soon.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Thanks, ZS. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. So on behalf of Bob O'Donnell from TECHnalysis Research, I'm ZS Caravallo from CK Research, and thanks for watching. Give us a like, hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you next time on my next episode of ZKast. Thanks, Bob.